the siege of Constantinople when they destroyed the Eastern Christian Empire. They used them at the Battle of Vienna. They were always the elite core of the Muslim force, and very often they were used to go out on raids to capture children from the same villages that they'd been kidnapped from. So a typical Muslim attack on a walled fortress would include thousands and thousands of captured slaves who were not very well trained, forced to fight. Their job was to go out, put the ladders up against the walls, and receive the boiling oil and the boulders and the arrows that came down. And the mass of the Muslim force was there to see that when the ladders went up, that they were there to go up the ladders and invade. And the Janissaries were there to be sure that if a good opportunity to breach the walls or something like that came up, that elite force could go in there. It would be like our special forces that would go in there, but they used them in the thousands. Now the the dimitude taxes were paid in humiliation and degradation. In other words, when you came to pay your taxes, you had to get down on your knees and beg to pay your taxes, and you had to submit to being slapped or spit on or in some way insulted or humiliated. And Muhammad insisted that it be done that way so that the dhimmi people would never forget that they were just being tolerated as long as they remained good slaves. If I didn't mention it, the Devshirme process also took daughters, but not for combat. The daughters were taken so that they could produce more soldiers, more Janissaries. There was another class of boys taken, and that was, they were called Mamluks, or also called Gilman. And you see this practice in Africa, where boy soldiers of 10, 12 years old are being used all across Africa. This was the practice that the Muslims induced. They would go into a region, they would capture slaves, young boys as slaves, and they would take them and turn them into their military force and use them as the shock troops. So what's being done in Africa is only honoring the Muslim tradition that goes back many, many centuries. These practices were most prominent in Albania, Serbia, Armenia, the Balkans, Slovenia, Croatia, Bulgaria, Macedonia, which is just north of Greece, and the Black Sea region. When I was talking about slavery, I wanted to mention it was millions of slaves taken out of Central Europe by the Muslims over many centuries. They were marched long, desperate marches through the Crimea. Masses of them died. They were in a hurry because if they didn't get out of there, the Cossacks, for example, out of Russia, would ride them down. And they were sending the slaves back with a small guarding force while they moved on to take more slaves. And they had to hurry. And anybody who couldn't keep up, they would kill. And one of the traditional practices was they allowed their young men, who were not really old enough to be a complete soldier yet, they allowed them to practice killing the people who couldn't keep up. Shooting arrows into them, throwing them in the river. They were their training material.
In order to make them cool.
I was going to tell you about dhimitude in modern times, and they killed roughly 250,000 Albanians at the end of the 19th century. From the end of the 19th century, about 1896 through 1915, they killed 1.5 million Armenians. The Turks did, as a reprisal for the Turkish, for the Albanian request that the